Dr. Tariq, Dr. Tariq Anwar to talk to us on GATT, International Business Trends and the Impact on Pakistan. Dr. Anwar is Associate Professor of Marketing and International Business at West Texas A&M University. He studied here in Pakistan in Government College Lahore. He did his BSc and then Master's from Punjab University, his MBA from United States International University, San Diego, California in 1981, and his CBA, Doctor of Business Administration from the same university in 1987. Dr. Anwar has written 14 articles in the paper, 11 conference proceedings, presented over 24 papers, various national conferences, and conducted lectures and served academic and related seminars. And he's received various awards and scholarships. Dr. Anwar talked for about 40 minutes, after which we have discussion for another half an hour.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum. Most of my research work, published work, is on international business, U.S., Japan, world trade. I also have written on the European Union, previously called European Community. And lately I've been concentrating on the GATT round, General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. My objective of this research seminar is to help you understand the concept of IB, international business, as well as General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. What are the implications for Pakistan, all the developing countries? And after that, I will also talk about some of the export strategies. You know that we are a very dynamic, export-oriented economy. Of course, our exports are only $7 billion. I believe they will grow in the next coming years. By the year 2000, I believe they will go beyond 15 billion if all the things go okay. So let me help you understand why GATT is so important. Why do we need to study GATT? What are the implications? What are the issues? What are the realities? General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, we go back to 1947. In 1947, the average tariff rate in this world was 45%. In 1992, the average tariff rate is 5%. Who made all the big changes? Of course, GATT, General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. 117 countries, member nations, and they are out of Geneva, Switzerland. In the last 47 years, GATT has conducted, initiated, and concluded about 5 to 6 rounds. Each and every round lasted for about 4 to 5 years. The last round, which was concluded last month, called the Uruguay round, because started from Uruguay, it lasted for about 7 years. They could not conclude in 1991. It was supposed to be concluded in 1991. Reason? French subsidies, European Union, Japanese market, American dumping issues, all these things. And above all, the developing countries. Because if you have 170 member nations, it's very difficult. You have to deal with thousands of issues, all the products and services. What happened in the various rounds, very briefly, under the Kennedy round, which was from 1964 to 1967, at that time we had 62 member nations. Average tariff reduction was about 35%. I'm going to be very brief because if we cover each and every area of GATT, I will not be able to cover some of the issues and implications for Pakistan. Tokyo round was 1973 to 1979, 99 member nations, and they were able to take care of all the areas like licensing, custom rules, technical subsidies, all these things. The last one was the Uruguay round, the most difficult, the most comprehensive, because for the first time GATT included agriculture. They also included intellectual property rights, patents, trademarks, all these things. They also included all the trade in services. Trade in services, most of you know that our economies are based on services. The services sector is growing in this world. All these things. So what's the main idea behind GATT? To eliminate tariff and non-tariff barriers, and also to reduce non-tariff barriers and tariff barriers. How do you define tariff barriers? Most of you know that. When products enter into your economy or into your country, you put taxes so that you can protect your local economy or local products or local industry. And then there are non-tariff barriers. Non-tariff barriers are mostly not visible, invisible barriers. What are those barriers? Voluntary export restraint. That is a non-tariff barrier. It happened between Japan and US. 1981, when Japanese, they complied with voluntary export restraint and they restricted their auto exports to the US. And then we have import expansion. That is also part of non-tariff barriers. When Japanese were asked by the US companies to buy more semiconductors in the last 6 years and 7 years, and you know that semiconductor is a $60 billion market in this world. It's a very big market. Japanese market share is about 60%, so that's another issue. What are the other non-tariff barriers? Licensing requirements, all the legal issues. But then the Western textbooks, they don't talk about one non-tariff barrier which is very well prevalent in this country. What is that non-tariff barrier? Political corruption. That is also part of non-tariff barrier. What else is there? Bureaucratic corruption. That is also part of non-tariff barrier. And I'll come to that issue later because it is also part of non-tariff barrier. So what happened on December 15, 1993, when GATT was concluded in Geneva? As I said, that they were delayed for 2 years. Why? Because many countries, they did not want to comply with the GATT rules. And I'm talking about European Union subsidies, mostly agricultural subsidies. They subsidize their agriculture, $40 billion a year, and then Japanese subsidies. And then developing countries also, they also have subsidies, and it's one of the problems in the GATT round. So what are the main things happened in GATT? First of all, they took care of the tariff problems. As I said before, tariffs, when you enter into somebody's country, it means they have to put taxes. How much taxes you have on Toyota or all these things, Suzuki and other, 35%, 100%, it's a way to protect your economy. They also took care of anti-dumping problems when you sell below your cost. It's very difficult to determine dumping issues, very difficult area. Colleagues from economics, they agree that it's very difficult to prove if you are dumping your product in somebody's economy. GATT also took care of textiles, and that is the most sensitive issue for Pakistan. Since 1974, you have one agreement, it's called multi-fiber arrangement. In multi-fiber arrangement, all the Western economies, they've restricted your product. Why? Because they wanted to protect their economy. So you had your quota. Pakistan had their quota under MFA. According to GATT, in the next 10 years, they eliminated this MFA in 3 phases. So by the year 2005, there will be no MFA, and you can sell your product by the year 2005 anywhere in the world because there won't be any MFA. I will also give you some of the implications because what are the net impacts. Okay, they also took care of intellectual property rights, very sensitive area. Most of you know that you can buy a computer, but sometimes they provide you software which is complimentary. I bought a computer for my brother last year. We paid about $2,000, about 60,000 rupees. And when I started to pay for the software, the shopkeeper told me that it's complimentary. So he gave us all the free software. I was very amazed. Back in the US, normally we pay $700 to $800 for 6 to 7 packages. So under that, somebody is losing. Somebody is losing their licensing fees. Somebody is losing their trademarks, patents, brand names. So I will also discuss what are the implications for Pakistan, because most of the developing countries, they do sell software but they don't pay money. It's mostly complimentary. And then there is another thing which was taken care of by GATT, and that is agriculture. The impact will be that you will get rid of most of the subsidies, the prices will go down, and of course all the consumers worldwide, they will get benefits. It will happen in 6 years. It's not going to happen in 1 year. See, one clarification, GATT, Uruguay round will be taken care of. They will take care of all the things by 1995. It's not going to happen this year. By July 1st, 1995. So we still have 1 more year to go. Services sector was also taken care of by GATT, which is about $900 billion worldwide market, very big market, services sector. Audiovisual services, subsidies, which I explained before. Safeguards. Safeguards is another issue. Safeguards are when you protect the local market and you restrict somebody's product. It's called safeguards. And then there's another area which was also taken care of by GATT rules, and GATT rules will be simplified in the next 5 years. What are the GATT rules we are talking about? Codes on custom valuation, import licensing, provisions for state trading enterprises, custom unions, free trade areas, free trade agreements, because GATT, they do allow you to seek and conclude and initiate free trade areas under Article 24. So I'm not going to get into that because that's another issue. So basically, one more thing, they also took care of technical barriers, common procurement, dispute settlement. You see, GATT treaty is more than 500 pages, so it's very difficult to cover everything under in 30 minutes. That's why I'm going like a runaway train. So what's the bottom line under GATT? Virtually every product in this world will be affected by GATT by the year 2005, because they do have 10 to 12 years. It's called gradualism. You can't implement your plans right away because it's a multilateral organization. One more thing happened interesting, and it's very interesting. On December 15, 1993, the GATT name is also changed from GATT to World Trading Organization. If you remember, in 1945, when GATT was started, it was part of the same Bretton Woods provision. And they had 3 institutions created, most of you know, World Bank, IMF, and GATT. So GATT, at that time it was called International Trade Organization. So from next year, GATT will be called World Trade Organization. Its jurisdiction will be increased significantly. Why? Because right now GATT has no jurisdiction over you. If you don't comply with GATT rules, they can't stop you selling your product in the world market. Why? Because they have no jurisdiction. And most of you know that there is no international law. When you make a contract or when you sell your product, mostly you decide whose jurisdiction and whose law. It's all done in your contract. Let me discuss some of the other issues. What are the implications for Pakistan? As I said before, most of your exports, they come under 3 areas. Cotton, and then you have rice, and then you have leather products. Number 4 is it's called wool and carpet goods. The total cotton or textile trade in this world is about $248 billion. Our market share in the world trade is only 1.6%. So now you can imagine that we have a very small market share. Although textile trade is one of the biggest trades in this world, and it comes under multi-fiber arrangement. As I said, that multi-fiber arrangement will be phased out in 3 different sessions. Each session will have 2 to 3 years, and by the year 2005, you can sell your product anywhere in the world. The thing is how to go through this transition. That's the most important thing. I believe Pakistan is a good beneficiary or big beneficiary in terms of textiles. But you have to wait and see what happens. Why? Because, as I said before, our total exports are 7 billion, and most of you know that our total exports should be more than 15 billion. If you look at Malaysia, 20 years ago, Malaysia was exporting mostly agricultural products, Right now, Malaysia is more than $40 billion. They have a big export market. So that's why some of the problems we face here, as I said before, non-tariff barriers are one of the main problems. That's why our exports cannot be elevated. And I told you some of the non-tariff barriers never discussed by the Western textbooks, but they are the product of Pakistan, and which I explained to you is part of the corruption. What else is going to happen? 10 years ago, your exports were 2 billion. Last year, your exports were 7 billion. This year's project is about 8 billion. So we have to wait and see, because it's very great to make plans, but when you come down to the implementation, you know that most of the plans in this world, you can't implement your plan 100%. It's wonderful to make strategies on this piece of paper. When you come down to the implementation stage, that's where most of the problems happen. So we have to wait and see. The second area which will be affected, and I believe it will be a win-win strategy for Pakistan, that is agriculture. As long as we stay efficient agricultural country, as long as we stay a good, efficient producer, it means we will capitalize, but the main area will be textiles. The areas where we are going to lose more, if we are a net importer of food, that's where we are going to lose. And most of the African countries will lose in this provision. The second area where we will be affected, I told you, intellectual property rights, patents, trademarks, all these things. And they have provided about 6 to 8 years, so that we have to phase in all the things which are demanded by GATT. And that's one of the interesting areas, because most of you know that Western companies, they lose a lot of money. Why? Because most of us don't pay. In the developing world, even in the Western world, many countries, they don't pay any money. Over there, software is also complimentary. I'm talking about Germany, Switzerland, Taiwan. 90% of the software you sell in China, most of you know, is illegal. You don't pay any penny for that. So this is one of the reasons. So overall, I believe in GATT, you have winners and you have losers. It's very difficult to have a win-win strategy. Sometimes you lose and sometimes you gain. And the areas where we are going to be gaining, all the things are agriculture, textiles, and maybe some of the intermediate technology. What's going to happen as far as our exports are concerned? And after that, I will briefly discuss some of the international trends and their impact on Pakistan. Some of the suggestions I have in order to elevate our exports. One suggestion I will give, and in my research, and most of the academic literature and corporate practices, they also agree that in order to elevate your exports, you've got to privatize. I'm talking very simple common sense things here. It's not all that academic. You have to privatize, but you have to be very careful. Which areas? You have to be very accurate in terms of timing. You can't just privatize your products or industries right away. Which areas, when, where, how, all these things. Very complicated. I believe you should also create a Ministry of Exports. If you look at Japan External Trade Organization, JETRO, very famous, their job is to help Japanese exporters in the world market. So we have to allocate, I believe, more money in order to initiate this export endeavor. I believe we also need to make major structural changes in our economy. We read all the time in the newspapers, editorials. Every time I come to Lahore, for 3 weeks I read wonderful articles. For 3 weeks you read all the things in the newspaper, but the problem is most of the people, they only make speeches. When it comes down to implementation, not too many plans are implemented efficiently and effectively. We should also eliminate some of the non-tariff barriers I explained before. You should also go for more trade liberalization. And it also depends on the timing and all the accurate stuff, because it's a very difficult area. What are the things you can use in order to increase your exports in the world market? And now I'm going to talk about some micro issues. Previously, these were all macro issues. There's a new concept in these days, it's called benchmarking. In benchmarking, most of you know that, you learn from your competitors. A very classic example of benchmarking. Most of you have gone to the US, you know that. 3M, or I believe Xerox Corporation, they went to LL Bean. LL Bean is a very small corporation, and Xerox is a very big corporation. But why did they go to LL Bean? Because LL Bean, their customer service and their delivery and distribution is 100% accurate. And most of you know that. In today's world, information is your asset. If you look at Walmart, they have this slogan, Walmart everyday low price. Their main competitive asset is their information, the way they use their information, scanning devices. By the end of 10 o'clock every day, Walmart knows how many products were sold all over the US. They have more than 18,000 stores. So information is your competitive asset. And that's what LL Bean they did. So Xerox capitalized on LL Bean's strategy. So benchmarking is a legal way to imitate somebody's ideas, somebody's strategy, and somebody's distribution system. I believe we should create a benchmarking warehouse, not warehouse but clearinghouse. Because when companies, they want to use somebody's data, it should go through the clearinghouse. And that will be a wonderful way, because if you want to imitate somebody, you should be a creative imitator like Japanese. If you imitate somebody 100%, it doesn't work. Benchmarking is one of the most innovative. The second thing, and I believe most of the management colleagues here, they agree with me, it's called re-engineering. Re-engineering is start from ground zero. If you have a system, get rid of that system. Start from ground zero. Take a clean piece of paper and start from ground zero, because some of the mistakes, if you have made some of the mistakes in the last 10, 15 years, in order to get rid of those mistakes, start from ground zero, change your system, and you should have a clean slate. What else is necessary in order to diversify our industrial base and increase exports? I believe we should go for more liberalization. See, the thing is, in my own opinion, we made a lot of mistakes in the last 20 years, but still there is a lot of things to be done. Couple of examples here. Look at the East Asia. Some people say it's an Asian sanctuary. A lot of things are going to happen in the next 10 years. Even Taiwan, they have allocated $30 billion just for their infrastructure. If you look at the overall foreign direct investment happening in the Asian market, right now it's more than $5 trillion. In the next 8 years, they believe, most of the analysts, they believe, and especially World Bank, that most of the foreign direct investment will happen in the Asian market. More than about 10 to 20 trillion dollars. Why people are going to Asia? Because that's where the markets are. And I'm talking about Vietnam, Malaysia, Singapore, Taiwan, Hong Kong, all these countries, South Korea, including South Korea. So all these things are part of the Asian century. And if you look at Malaysia and if you look at Vietnam, Singapore, Hong Kong, their exports are booming. And the reason is because they have a very, very active export department. I'll give you one very interesting example. Last week I gave a talk at the Foreign Service Academy in Islamabad, and I also gave a talk at the Foreign Trade Institute, and there was a very big debate. We had two types of groups at the Foreign Trade Academy, I believe. Foreign Trade Academy in Pakistan. One group was mostly bureaucrats, and the other group was all the business people. And the way discussion started, they hated each other. Business people blame bureaucrats, and bureaucrats people, they blame business people. So that's where the main problem is. Nobody wants to take responsibility. And it was a very, very interesting issue. I never had this sort of interesting issue where both parties were facing each other. So how do you get rid of that problem? See, we are wonderful in terms of plans, and we are also wonderful in terms of strategies, but we start from tactics. And most of you know that you first have to make a plan, develop your strategy, make your mission, objectives, and then we go to the tactics. We start from tactics, and then we go back to our strategy, and finally we deal with our plan. That's what the main weakness is, and that is organization. We lack in our organizational capability. See, this is a very interesting topic, and there is so much literature available. In the last 6-7 years, we have seen a lot of academic literature being built under exports. Exports was a very big area before, but now you do have a lot of literature available. Some of the trends happening in this world. What are the trends happening? And I'm talking about mostly international business trends. And one is economic globalization. If you read Kanishi is from Japan. He's one of the consultants, and he has a very interesting book called Borderless World. He used this phrase borderless world, and you do have a borderless world. $200 to $300 billion change hand every day. $200 to $300 billion change hand every day. And the reason is it's all an economic transfer. You don't have any borders in terms of economics, and you don't have any borders in terms of goods and services. Of course, you do have your sovereign borders. The second thing happening, which is part of the first thing which I explained, is called international consumer convergence. It's also a new phrase, it's a new term. Again, it was introduced by Kanishi and Akio Morita. Akio Morita is the chairman of Sony Corporation. And according to international consumer convergence, you will know that you can change somebody's lifestyle. It's a very interesting concept in international marketing. You can change somebody's lifestyle, but you cannot change somebody's values. If you look at your television, CNN, BBC, if you look at your jeans, the jeans you wear, the way you eat, and the things you eat, somebody is changing your lifestyle, but they can't change your values. And then when people buy basmati rice, and when they buy your handmade sauces overseas, you are also changing their lifestyle. There are so many people, some of my friends, they love your basmati rice. And most of you know that it's an international consumer convergence happening. You see, if you look at 1960s and 1970s, a very famous author from Harvard University, Ted Levitt. After that, Peter Drucker. In 60s and 70s, they developed a lot of literature in this area. But then in 1980s and 90s, we have a new era coming. And in that era, you have Kanishi, you have Akio Morita, you have Bartlett and Ghoshal. I don't want to get into all the academic stuff, because that's where things started to change. And it was part of the international consumer convergence. International consumer convergence is a virtual reality. And I believe we should capitalize on this reality. Why? Because that's the name of the game in international business. So to conclude this session, what's going to happen in the next 5 years? As I explained before, and some people may agree, some people may not agree, but I believe it will be the 18th century. Most of the foreign direct investment happening is in all the Asian countries. And you don't have Cold War, there is no Cold War. Of course, you have economic war. The problem in economic war is that you cannot catch somebody. You see, in Cold War, you had two main competitors. They were very visible. You could understand their strategies, you could predict their strategies. In the economic war, look at US and Japan trade. Japanese, they had $42 billion surplus with the US last year, and mostly it's part of the economic war. Japanese are also wonderful in terms of offending all the countries. Japanese, they have 60% market share in the semiconductor. It's part of the economic war. Economic wars are difficult, economic wars are not predicted, and economic wars are difficult to be managed. And that's what's going to happen in the next 6-7 years. And one of the reasons GATT, Uruguay round, they were concluded, I believe it's a good blessing. Of course, we are going to lose in some areas, but it's a good blessing for the whole world, because they believe that by the year 2000, you will reduce your average tariff rate by 2%. So right now, the average tariff rate in the developed world is about 5%, so it will come down to even 2%. Who's going to be the main beneficiary? I believe mostly consumers. And it will create jobs, it will create opportunities, it will increase our exports. But again, we have to be very careful, because I give you two more examples. In the textile industry, most of you know that by the year 2000, MFA will be phased out. So we have to start from today. And that's where it's not going to happen. we will make our planning by 1998 when all the countries will be ready to capitalize on the GATT talk. The second area, and that is our handmade carpet. Wonderful product. Most of you know it's a well-taken product in the world market. But 2-3 years ago, your carpet industry was in big problem. Why? Because they did not do their homework, and that was market research. When the time was good, they were selling to all the countries, but then they started to see Nepal and China and India. All these 3 countries, they capture your market share. Although you still have 15% of your exports in the carpet industry, but I believe that's a very, very competitive area. I have talked to some of the people in New York, all the big warehouses, and they say that the whole industry is changing. Why? Because we lacked one thing, and that is we did not pay attention to our market research. What are the main designs and motives and all the things liked by the Western consumers? We were selling again and again the same products to all the countries, although the major market is in Germany. But we never paid attention to the US market. That's where the main carpet industry is. So these are the 2 examples, and I believe that there will be some losers and there will be some gainers. We have to wait and see what happens, but as far as Pakistan is concerned, GATT, Uruguay round, it's a good blessing. If you capitalize on your textile industry, and if you also get out of some of the agricultural products, and if you have some diversity in your industrial base, then you will be able to capitalize on the Uruguay rounds of all the tariff and non-tariff barriers, when you phase out all the tariff and non-tariff barriers. It's a very interesting area. We make a lot of speeches, I believe, but we don't implement our plan. And that's the discussion I had in Islamabad, and it was a wonderful discussion. And most of the people, they don't take responsibility. And of course, if you know Japanese management, each and every level they take responsibility. So what's going to happen? The world trade is going to go beyond $15 trillion by the end of this century. And that's going to happen under the auspices of GATT, or by the time it will be called WTO, World Trade Organization. Overall, I believe it's a win-win strategy. Again, there are some losers and gainers, and we have to wait and see. But we must have some sort of gradualism. We should have strategies ready for the next 4 or 5 years so that we can capitalize, especially on the Uruguay round. I stop here and let's open this door for your discussion.
What should Pakistan do to benefit from this, and what policies are you recommending?
I am recommending, I've stated before, we should create a separate ministry, export ministry. Although it's a pretty big structural change as far as Islamabad is concerned. The second thing I recommend is that we should take care of some of the investment problems. If you are a small investor, it's very difficult to get a loan. And the third thing is, which I believe is not going to happen in the next 20 years or at least 50 years, and that I call it is your non-tariff barriers. If we can take care of these 3 areas, I think we are in good shape.
But don't you think that with the GATT agreement and the removal of these non-tariff and tariff barriers, the world is going to become even more competitive? And basically then you would be able to compete on certain dimensions, and some of the dimensions are either cost, you have to be the least cost producer, or quality, you have to have reasonable, if not the best quality. You need to have workforce which is competitive with the workforce in the rest of the world, and your workforce has to be competitive with what's in Malaysia or Thailand or Sri Lanka. Do you think we are in that kind of situation? And what do we need to do to make sure that we are competitive in the world?
I will use one term, and that is we should initiate some sort of mega structural changes. What are those mega structural changes? Proper training of our human resources. But again, it's a long-term strategy. See, most of our things done in the last 6-7 years, we never had any long-term strategy. Every 2 or 3 years, most of you know that anytime you have a change in the country, you go back to square one and you start from ground zero. So that's where the main problem is. The central nervous system, I believe, is if we can get rid of some of the non-tariff barriers, and then all the things will be automatically changed or they will be rectified. The non-tariff barrier, I believe, is the main issue in this country and for many developing countries, especially in Africa. Yes.
What about the financial services? Was there an agreement on that? And it seems that these big houses, investment houses, move capital around the country. What can Pakistan do or expect regarding GATT and the power of these houses?
Yes, when financial services are concerned, in my own opinion, we are not a big player, to be very honest. In fact, it took a long time. That's why Uruguay rounds were delayed because U.S. and Japan, and of course the EU, European Union, they did not want to cooperate. See, right now, still there are some areas where you cannot enter into the UN as far as financial services are concerned. Go to the Japanese market. Some areas are still not available. Some areas are still off limits to foreigners. So as far as financial services are concerned, I believe GATT is not all that successful because the time period is very long.
What can Pakistan expect from this?
I believe we should internationalize your stock exchanges. You see, in the last 4 or 5 years, there is some research done, and that research, according to that research, look at all the East Asian countries. Those are booming economies. Even China is a booming economy. Not in terms of the whole country, but in terms of its coastal valley, Guangdong province. Why? Because they are internationalizing their stock exchanges. Malaysia, Taiwan, Singapore, South Korea, all these countries. So we can also become part of this 21st century. How do we do that? We can do that through our stock exchanges. I've been hearing and I've been reading lately. There is, I believe, some sort of initiative, but I don't know, it hasn't been implemented so far. That sounds great. As I said before, we are a minor player in this area. Yes.
Apart from textile and carpet industry, do you think that our current more industrialized parts of our economy, they are competitive enough in the global economy right now? I mean,
I don't think so.
so after this GATT agreement, it will be two-way thing. They are opening doors for our textile and everything. We are opening doors for the more high technology things. So do you think that it will negatively affect our development in these areas?
Yes, absolutely. In the short run. But as far as I'm concerned, there is one remedy available, and that is if you attract more foreign investment. Foreign investment from the private sector. If you look at India and South Korea and Taiwan, there are so many software companies, not only manufacturing but doing their research and development. Bangalore is a big, huge market. And South Korea and Taiwan, they are also part of the whole initiative. I think that sort of strategy is possible. But again, if somebody brings $200 million to Pakistan, they also need some security. And what's the security? Of course, long-term security. And that's where the main problem is. And I don't have any answer for that. Yes.
I have a serious problem with this whole approach of which I would call doing the right thing. And the problem is that it falls, in some ways it falls, it subject to the same criticism that you are imposing upon other plans and how we make strategies and things like that. And the real problem is that the strategies that you're providing are more descriptive. I mean, what it is yes, this is the right thing. The right thing is to be good. The right thing is to work hard. The right thing is to be better. But they are very strongly, they are not prescriptive in the sense of having a scenario in which you have a positive framework of what exactly is the reality out there, and then you prescribe on how to get from there. I think we all know what the right thing is. The right thing is to work very hard, not be corrupt, do all the good things. That doesn't tell us much. I mean, if you just tell us what you just said, I don't think there is much information that you are conveying to us as what is the right thing. Don't be corrupt. Yeah, everybody in the world, every child knows not to be corrupt. Corruption is bad, it hurts the economy, does all this. We all know that. So I don't think there is any sense in describing what the right thing is. There's a approach of a consultant who says that somehow comes in and tells us what the right thing is. I don't think that has any point to telling to an audience like that. But the issue is in the sense is to describe what the reality is, have what is called a positive model. And then try to go from the positive model, figure out what the incentives of the various people are, and then see what role the analyst is playing, if there are a particular principle in it, what are the incentives. There needs to be a full-blown model of the economy you have in your head before you can prescribe what's going on. And the best example of that is for example, your example of the exporting ministry. I mean, if you're talking about corruption in a ministry, I mean, how can you give a prescription which says that you set up another ministry which is going to mess up things even worse? So the idea being that you have to have a positive model of what the problems are. It is only then, in that context that you can prescribe. This idea of having an exporting ministry flies directly in the face of your non-direct values. And the problem is because the underlying features of what are the problems are not being analyzed. So my feeling is that it's okay to describe the right thing. I think there's a lot of information that people get from it. But on the other hand, I don't think it's worth it.
Let me ask you one question. How do you define your positive model?
Well, I think that we have to work on it. I mean, I think that's where the work needs to be done. Rather than giving a, for example, I can give you a number of examples in which what you want to think about is what is the role, for example, I mean, just off the top of my head, I can give you an example. What is, for example, how is behavior restrained? I mean, for example, what you want to think about is what is the role of institutions as the economy is evolving? What is the role between social institutions and formal institutions in terms of when you're talking about corruption? I mean, I'm just giving an example of the most important thing you talked about, which is corruption. You want to think about what is it that in a particular institution when people are shirking, for example, 4 of us are working in a team together, and this guy is not putting in his fair share. What kind of mechanism exists in this institution to make sure that does? Well, we have reputation, we have censure, we have formal institutions and things like that. And you want to start, that's a positive model as to what is it in place, and as the external environment changes, is that anyway, I mean, we can talk about that, but my feeling is that talking about doing the right thing it doesn't give us much.
When you diagnose, you got to do something.
No, I mean,
and then you only look at the symptoms. And then if you don't have any remedy, then I believe the whole system will collapse. I agree with you, we all know what are the main problems in this country, but somebody got to take some initiative, someday, somewhere. And I use this word re-engineering. Re-engineering is start from ground zero. Of course there are some problems. It's not going to happen in the next 5 years.
What does that mean, start from ground zero? Disband 20 ministries and it won't
No, do not disband. There is a one word called gradualism. If you have a system where you have a gradualist approach, most of the people in economics will know that you don't implement your plans overnight. It's a gradualist approach. Look at European Monetary Union. It's almost 6-7 years. They are still not able to implement European currency. And the reason is because they all go for the gradualist approach. I know it's a very difficult area and it's a never-ending discussion, but yes, sir.
You just termed the final agreement as a blessing for Pakistan. Ahmad Kamal, who's Pakistan's ambassador to GATT, just gave a statement in which he said that Islamabad is going to lose millions of dollars because of GATT. Do you see his position? Are you saying that?
I think it's all politicized. Because as I said before, let's take the example of textiles. Under MFA, in the next 9 years, 10 years, all the things will be phased out, all the quotas will be phased out. I don't know, I have to look at him.
See, but the thing is, Pakistani textile industry is not competitive enough. You see?
In what area? Because it's a big area. Textile and cotton is a big area. In some areas they are competitive, in some areas I believe they are not competitive.
In which areas are they competitive?
Mostly clothing, cotton-based, all these. But in some areas they are not competitive, and that is one thing. As I said before, the cotton, these carpets.
See, when you're not competitive in the international market, I mean, when you take down tariffs and all sorts of barriers, and everyone is allowed to compete freely, I think it's going to hurt you, right? Rather than benefiting.
It will hurt you in the short term, but it will not hurt you in the long term.
Right.
And that's where we don't know how to go through this transitionary phase, which is like 8 years. And that's where the main problem will be. It's a very critical and sensitive area. But by the year 2000, if you have the right plan, if you know how to go through these things, you never know what's going to happen after 2 years. And then you again come back to ground zero. And that's where the main problem is. Yes.
Yeah, just a couple of comments. I think after the last comment, I think I understand where you're coming from, so I'll keep my remarks in that thing. But first of all, I'd like to correct that impression that Thomas made there. During the presentation, you mentioned a number of times referring to the non-tariff barriers and protection and so on, that these are inferior because the country, they want to protect their economy. I think that's absolutely wrong statement. Whenever you're protecting a single part of an economy. And this is sort of misleading. I think a lot of times people do that. You know in economics that when you impose tariffs, you protect that industry and people who own that industry and the other sector of the economy, you pay. You refer to one of the things yeah, the same thing. You said they did that to protect their economy. They didn't do that to protect their economy.
No, who did? Japanese or American?
No, American.
American, okay.
But you refer to that to protect their economy. I'm just questioning that context. What they did that was to protect auto industry in the United States at a very high cost.
Very high cost.
Because each auto worker's job that was saved, very studies show it cost $150,000 to $200,000. Because that was the return. So I think that kind of thing that we keep talking about in some of this discussion. Now, coming back to the question that you mentioned about Pakistan and agriculture, that GATT would have implications, I think the bigger question was see there. But from what I see, and I've been here a few months myself, and I've been trying to find out, one thing that bothers me is, given the present rate of population explosion that's taking place in Pakistan, already you're importing food products. So with the present system of subsidies, and unless somebody else has said agriculture and we get it cheaper, what that's done, America and Canada, we gain, of course, because our products are now competing with the highly subsidized French, whatever, and European subsidies. So the point is, I think that would be negative impact on Pakistan. I'm not saying it shouldn't happen. I think we should face up to this and correct it some other way. But that would be very negative. One final comment about the textile sector. It's interesting to see here, if you're running a business in textiles, you have to buy cotton, the price of that is not allowed to fluctuate freely. For whatever reason, I don't know, maybe the landlords have more power in whatever decision making, I don't know. Second, you're on a futures market. If you're running a business, you should be able to buy cotton in the future. But I understand there's some religious problem there. I don't know, not allowed in that sound. I have no idea if it's talking to someone. So I'm thinking now you're a businessman, you're operating in the textile industry, you have to buy cotton relatively expensive than it should be probably in the free market. You can't hedge it. So you have to go now buy it today if the price is going to be higher tomorrow. You have to finance it. You go to the bank, that's another disaster. To begin with, your interest rates are 20-some%. Well, how are you going to be competitive? The question is. So there are a lot of these things that you do. You're talking about promoting exports. My personal experience, last time I was flying out, I had to give a huge big statement to guys, a little customs boy there, asking me if I want more than one rug. There's my export permit. For God's sake, the country is trying to export. We shouldn't have these bureaucrats asking you to be happy. Go to the market, buy everything, take it home. But your point was already done. But if you're going to create another ministry, then you would have a whole bunch of other people wanted me to give them a little bit so I can take my contract home.
Let me clarify one thing. When I said open a new ministry or start a new ministry, you don't do that, as I said.
It has replaced something else.
No, you go through a sort of a gradual approach. It may take you 4 years, it may take you 3 years.
But that time the gap would be history. The point is, are we going to be able to compete in the world or not? Do we have any advantage at all currently? And if we don't, how do we create that advantage? If you look at, one way would be our brain power. Are we very brainy people? Are we very educated? Do we have the universities? Do we have the research institutions to compete in the world? If the answer is no, can we do much in that area? Probably not. Do we have a good workforce? Are they the least cost workers in the world? Are they paid are they paid less than people in Bangladesh, less than Sri Lanka? They make less money than our neighbors? The answer is no. We make more money. The labor is more expensive than what it is in India or in China. In China, you can get an accountant for 500 rupees. Over here, you pay an accountant 20,000 rupees. Can we compete with China? Probably no. Raw materials, are they the cheapest in the world? Perhaps not. Here, I mean, the agriculture you talk about, we are the most inefficient producers of agriculture. The financial sector, our interest rates are probably the highest in the world. We pay about 3 to 4% in spread because of the stock-up loans in the bank. I mean, the banking system has 80 to 100 billion rupees non-performing. So the current industrialist or whoever is going to borrow from the bank is going to pay 3, maybe 4% extra for what the other people have done in the past. And can they compete with that 3 to 4% extra when they are competing with somebody from Sri Lanka or Bangladesh? Our energy costs, are we the lowest in the world? Do we have plenty of energy? No, we don't have plenty of energy. We have the most expensive energy. And to top it all off, every day 6 or 7 hours, it's not there when you need it most. And I mean, what the hell are you going to do? So if the quotas are phased out, I am afraid you lose out on everything. You won't be able to sell what you are selling currently.
Yes, sir. We have talked about the issue of export. So we have export commerce from Europe, which is quite enough for demoralizing the exporters and to reduce exports. And secondly, you have talked about MSA has gone, but we never know what comes next, because whenever we got rid of Pressler amendment, we got up by Solar's amendment. So they are there to stop you from exporting things. So do you have any suggestion to? I don't want to just react what they do. We should have our own policies and we should have our own plans to work on. Do you have any suggestion on that?
My answer is, and as I said before, you live in a highly interdependent world. You can't isolate yourself. You are a minor player in the world economy. Look at your cotton market. All your rice and cotton, they constitute 50% of your exports. You only constitute 1.6. Your market share in the world cotton market is only 1.6%. What's the answer? I don't have any answer, but I think we are a minor player. And how do we go through this 4 or 5 years? I have no answer. And that's the main problem.
Liberalize it.
And we are not only alone. There are so many other countries.
I think you answered part of it, may interject here. Partly answer that yourself, I think somewhere in this discussion. To me, the solution is liberalize as fast rate as we can to take care of all these corruptions in the economy. That I have been very impressed by the entrepreneurial spirit of the Pakistani business people. And I'm amazed that throughout this bureaucracy we can still do anything. And if you can take that away, I think there's a fantastic amount of talent. And they'll come through. So right now the costs are prohibitive really because of too many controls. So liberalize it faster rate, open up the economy at a faster rate. Because your own example of Malaysia, Singapore, that was it, and they're more outward looking economy. We have been always, we still have 200% duty or 500% duty on outward use to protect our lives. You can't do it both ways. Either we liberalize or we not.
I would away from the question. I think what we are talking about is what we need to do, and I think people who are in this country are following the recipe we think and we can work on it. Not scared to expect him to give us the recipe to sort of work on our problems. What I was interested in knowing was a little more detail about the details of it, which because I don't know much about that. As to, I mean, what would be different and how would it come about? You talked about the tariffs going down. Which areas would they go down at what rate, and maybe there is some window of opportunity available for people who are sort of operating very businesses. So I think that would have, I don't know whether you can sort of sum it up, because we didn't, at least I didn't pick up too much specific information about that. Just heard that overall the tariffs are going to go down and they're going to go down over a period of time. But how are they going to be different in different areas, and whether the impact on our imports will come before the impact on some of the things that we export, and what may be the implications of that?
I understand your frustration. The reason is the GATT talks were concluded on December 15th, and I believe when I go back, it's more than 500 pages. I haven't myself even looked at it, so it will take time. So that's why it's very difficult to pinpoint each and every area.
I think almost concluded this point. Okay.
You talked about the international law and the jurisdiction is going to increase after the next year, July. So, what are the implications of these laws? Let's suppose, I don't think that Pakistan is going to compete
if these tariffs are going to be established. So if, let's suppose that a country is not following these things, then what are the laws and the jurisdictions that are going to stop the country from doing these things?
Okay, the statement I made was World Trade Organization, that's the new name of that after July 1st, 1995. Okay, their jurisdiction will be increased in what way? In terms of harmonizing world trade, keeping an eye on those countries which do not comply, especially Japan, because if you remember, in 1989, Japan, US used Section 301. US also used Super 301. And the purpose is because GATT couldn't help the US. And the same thing is GATT couldn't help the developing countries. So the purpose was to provide sufficient jurisdiction to GATT and WTO after 1995, so that when you make a system, you've got to have a lot of subsystems. And they have to be compatible between those subsystems. So coming back to your question, the purpose is how to harmonize. And that's why it will be easier, much easier, to enforce in terms of enforcement.
What about the smuggling and all these, you were talking about the software piracy. You can't afford to buy, let's suppose, $2,000 software.
I agree with you. I agree with you.
You have to copy the software.
Sure, but I agree with you. In many countries, students don't have the money to buy. But the thing is, when you increase your market share, when you sell 1 million pieces, the cost will automatically go down. And again, they have provided 8 years to be 8 years with this software. Intellectual property right is a very difficult area. And I'm not talking about software, I'm also talking about pharmaceuticals, I'm talking about physical as well, consumer writing laws.
If something is very expensive, you don't buy it. Don't steal it.
Make your own.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll see in the cafeteria. Thank you very much.